I packed my things and disappeared after my husband slapped me at his birthday dinner in front of his friends and family. 4 years later, I was invited to an exclusive meeting of millionaire elites in my hometown. And the moment I landed, I got the kind of news that makes your stomach hollow out, like you've been punched from the inside. You know that feeling when you're standing on the edge of a cliff, thinking you're about to jump into something beautiful, only to realize you're actually falling into your own grave? That was me on March 15th, planning what I truly believed would be the perfect night for Declan's 36th birthday. I had been working on it for months. Not weeks, months. Every detail had to be flawless because that's what Declan deserved. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself while I watched my savings bleed out, one perfect decision at a time. The rooftop venue alone cost me $3,000. Not just any rooftop, this was the penthouse terrace at the Meridian, floor-to-ceiling windows, the whole city laid out beneath us, the river cutting through downtown like a ribbon of dark glass. Lights everywhere, twinkling like diamonds scattered across black velvet, the kind of view that makes people go quiet without realizing they've stopped breathing. The wine! I flew in cases of French bottles the wine guy called Transcendent. $400 a bottle. Enough to keep everyone warm and buzzing without ever reaching the awkward moment of running out. The quartet was real too. Actual musicians with instruments that gleamed under the string lights I had installed specifically for this night. Their music sounded like it was polishing the air. And the cake was a masterpiece. 3 tiers of Belgian chocolate, edible gold leaf, sugar flowers so delicate they looked alive. It was designed to represent Declan's journey, his love for art, his dreams of traveling, the version of him I kept trying to protect from the world. I had mapped the whole night like a military operation. Guests at 7, sunset cocktails, music as the last daylight faded, dinner, speeches, cake, then him looking at me like I was the woman who made him feel seen. But when Declan stood up to give his thank you speech, he thanked everyone. His sister Bianca, his mom, his friends, even the waitstaff. And me? Nothing. Not even a glance. Then he looked straight at me, eyes cold, voice sharp enough to cut through the music. "This whole setup screams desperation," he said. I didn't even have time to inhale before his hand came across my face, hard enough to make my ears ring. And the laughter that followed was the moment I realized I wasn't being loved. I was being used. Before that night, before the slap, before the laughter, before I learned how quietly dignity can bleed out in public, I would have told you I had a good marriage. Not perfect, but solid, real. I was 32 when I met Declan. I was working in digital strategy then, freelance contracts, long nights, the kind of work that lives on hard drives and deadlines instead of office desks. Declan was magnetic in the way people mistake for depth, charismatic, loud without trying. The kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately become its center, not because he demanded attention, but because people handed it to him willingly. We met at a gallery opening his sister Bianca had dragged him to. I remember noticing his laugh before I noticed his face. It was easy, careless, like nothing had ever really gone wrong for him. When he spoke to me, he listened. At least I thought he did. He asked questions, nodded at the right moments, touched my elbow like he was anchoring himself in the conversation. He made me feel chosen. We moved fast. Too fast, if I'm honest now. He hated being alone. I hated wasting time. Within a year, we were married. Small ceremony, big promises. I believed in effort the way some people believe in fate. I believed love was something you built, brick by brick, even when your hands hurt. The early years weren't bad. They were uneven. Declan had ambition, but it was slippery. Big ideas, no follow-through. He talked about investments, startups, consulting firms, but somehow the actual work never stuck to him. I picked up more contracts, took on the steady roles, paid the bills when things got tight. I told myself it was temporary. Partnerships aren't always balanced, right? Sometimes one person carries more weight for a while. That while stretched into years. His family never said anything outright. They didn't have to. Bianca's smiles always felt sharpened at the edges. His mother would ask polite questions about my work, then pivot immediately to Declan's potential, as if it were already a tangible asset waiting to mature. At dinners, Declan liked to tell stories where I became a supporting character in my own life. My sacrifices turned into his stress. My planning became his pressure. If I corrected him, he'd squeeze my knee under the table, hard enough to warn me, soft enough to look affectionate. "You're too sensitive," he'd say later. "Why do you always need credit? Can't you just let things flow?" I learned to swallow words before they reached my mouth. There were signs. God, there were so many signs. The way he flinched when I asked about money. The way he lit up around people he thought were useful. The way he withdrew affection when I questioned him, then flooded me with it when he needed reassurance. I told myself love wasn't supposed to be easy. I told myself growth hurt. By the time his 36th birthday approached, I wasn't planning a party anymore. I was trying to prove something. To him, to his family, to myself. That if I could just create one flawless night, one undeniable moment of generosity and devotion, he would finally see me, appreciate me, choose me the way I had chosen him over and over again. What I didn't understand yet was this. You can build a palace for someone and still be treated like a guest. And on that rooftop, under those lights I paid for, surrounded by people who benefited from my silence, I learned that I had never really belonged there at all. After the birthday, things didn't explode right away. They curdled. The slap became the thing nobody mentioned, but everyone adjusted around, like a crack in a wall that people stop pointing out once they accept it's permanent. Declan didn't apologize. Not really. He brushed it off with that half smile he used when he wanted to move on without taking responsibility. "You embarrassed me by trying too hard," he said one night, folding his shirts like nothing had happened. I reacted, that's all. I remember standing in the doorway, watching his hands move, calm, methodical, while my face still felt hot in my memory. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask how it felt to be struck in front of people who already thought I was trying to buy my way into belonging. Instead, he asked why I made him do it. That was when the air in our apartment started to feel heavier. He became distant in subtle ways. Not cold exactly, just selectively warm. Affection came in bursts, usually when other people were around. In private, he was distracted. His phone never left his hand. He laughed at messages he wouldn't explain. When I asked, he'd roll his eyes. "Bianca," he'd say, or "just business." Bianca, meanwhile, stopped pretending to like me. She'd drop by unannounced, commenting on the furniture I paid for, the food I cooked, the way I dressed. Always framed as jokes, always with Declan nearby, silent, letting it happen. "You're intense," she told me once, sipping wine on my couch. "Declan's more effortless." Effortless. The word lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. His mother started calling more often, not to check on me, but to check on him. Was he stressed? Did I understand how much pressure he was under? Had I considered being more supportive? Supportive. I was covering half his expenses, handling our logistics, managing our future, yet somehow I was the one being asked to give more. The doubts crept in slowly. A late meeting that ran past midnight. A weekend strategy retreat that produced no visible outcomes. A woman's name I didn't recognize popping up on his phone, saved under initials instead of a full contact. When I asked, he sighed like I was exhausting. "Why are you looking for problems?" he said. "Do you want to ruin what we have?" So I stopped asking. I started paying attention instead. The way he straightened his posture around certain people. The way his voice softened when he spoke to women who laughed at his jokes. The way he seemed irritated by my presence unless I was useful or silent. I replayed moments from our past, seeing them with clearer eyes. The arguments that always ended with me apologizing. The plans that were always too much. The dreams that were always later. I wasn't paranoid. I was waking up. But waking up doesn't mean you're ready to leave. Not yet. Part of me still believed this was a phase. That stress had warped him. That love, if handled carefully enough, could still be salvaged. So I tried smaller gestures, more space, fewer questions, softer words, and every compromise felt like shaving off another piece of myself. The night before I packed my bags, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes were tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I pressed my palms against the counter and whispered, "This isn't who you are." But I didn't know yet who I was becoming. Not until the moment I chose to disappear. The moment that finally broke everything didn't come with shouting at first. It came with a tone. A quiet, almost bored tone, like what he was about to say wasn't important enough to deserve emotion. It was 2 nights after the birthday. The apartment still smelled faintly of leftover cake and expensive wine, a ghost of celebration hanging in the air like a bad joke. Declan was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, one leg crossed over the other, relaxed in a way that felt obscene. I stood near the kitchen island, pretending to rinse a glass that was already clean. Did you mean what you said? I asked. He didn't look up. About what? About me trying too hard. About embarrassing you. That finally got his attention. He sighed, set the phone down slowly, and looked at me like a teacher dealing with a student who just wouldn't get it. I thought we agreed to move on, he said. We didn't, I replied. My voice sounded steady, but my hands were shaking. You hit me, in front of people. He leaned back, eyes narrowing, not with guilt, but irritation. You're exaggerating, he said. It was a reaction. You pushed me. Something cold slid down my spine. By loving you? I asked quietly. That was when his mouth twisted into something like contempt. By needing so much, he said. By turning everything into a performance. That party wasn't about me. It was about you showing everyone what you could afford. I felt my chest tighten, like my lungs had suddenly shrunk. I did that for you, I said, because you said no one ever celebrated you properly. And now you're throwing it in my face, he snapped. This is exactly why things don't work between us. You keep score. You make everything transactional. I took a step closer, my heart hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Are you seeing someone else? I asked. The room went very still. Declan didn't answer right away. He stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, and checked his watch like the conversation had already overstayed its welcome. I don't have time for this, he said. That was my answer. I felt something inside me fracture, not loudly, not dramatically. It was more like bone giving way under pressure, a deep internal snap that left everything unstable. Answer me, I said, my voice cracking despite my effort. Just tell me the truth. He turned then, eyes sharp, jaw set. You're being paranoid, he said. But honestly, if I were, could you blame me? You've sucked the joy out of everything. The words hit harder than the slap. I tasted metal. My vision blurred at the edges. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, heart racing, skin buzzing, breath coming too fast. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up, working while he slept. All the times I defended him to my family. All the excuses I'd made for a man who now looked at me like an inconvenience. You don't love me, I said. He didn't deny it. That silence, heavy, deliberate, was the moment I knew. I walked past him into the bedroom and closed the door. My hands moved on instinct, pulling out a suitcase, opening drawers. The sound of the zipper felt impossibly loud. My movements were calm in a way that scared me. On the other side of the door, Declan didn't follow. He didn't knock. He didn't ask where I was going. He assumed, I think, that I'd cool down, that I'd unpack, that I'd stay. By the time I carried the first suitcase into the living room, he was already gone. That night, I packed everything that mattered. Clothes, documents, my laptop, my external hard drives, the ones that held years of my work, my ideas, my unfinished future. I didn't cry. Not yet. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter, right beside his keys. And just before I walked out, I looked around the apartment I had paid for, filled, and shrunk myself to fit inside. I choose me, I whispered. Then I disappeared. The shock didn't hit me right away. It crept in during the quiet. I drove for hours that night with no real destination, the city lights thinning out until the road felt endless and anonymous. My hands stayed steady on the steering wheel, but my body felt hollow, like something essential had been scooped out and left behind without painkillers. I kept waiting to break down. It didn't happen. Instead, my mind started replaying everything, like it was searching for a mistake it could still fix. Maybe I shouldn't have asked that question. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe love really does mean letting things go. That thought made my throat tighten, because how much more of myself was I supposed to let go before there was nothing left? I checked into a cheap motel just before dawn. The carpet smelled like bleach and old smoke. The walls were thin enough that I could hear a couple arguing 2 rooms down, their voices rising and falling in familiar patterns. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, staring at my suitcase like it belonged to someone else. That was when the shaking started. My hands, my knees, my breath catching halfway in. I pressed my palms together and tried to slow it down, counting inhales like I used to during deadlines. But this wasn't stress. This was grief, raw and directionless. I had built my life around Declan. Not in the obvious, dramatic way people warn you about, but in a quiet, insidious way. Every choice had been filtered through what would keep the peace, what would make things easier, what would make him stay. And now that he hadn't even tried to stop me, the realization burned worse than the slap ever had. I wasn't abandoned. I was released. The next morning, my phone finally lit up. 3 missed calls, 1 text. You're overreacting. Come home and we'll talk. No apology, no concern, just an assumption. I stared at the screen until my eyes stung, then turned the phone face down. That was the first time I didn't answer him. By the third day, I was somewhere in Oregon, where the rain fell like it had nowhere better to be. I found a tiny apartment above an old bookstore, Frederick's literary haven. The place smelled like paper and dust and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Frederick, the owner, didn't ask questions. He took the cash, handed me the keys, and said, "Fresh starts don't need explanations." At night, though, the questions came anyway. Was I foolish for leaving without a plan? Had I exaggerated everything in my head? Did strong women walk away, or did they endure? I remembered Declan's face when he'd said I needed too much. And for the first time, I asked myself a different question. What if the problem wasn't that I needed too much? What if it was that I was giving too much to the wrong person? A week later, Bianca called. I almost didn't answer. Her voice was sugary, concerned in a way that felt rehearsed. "Declan's worried about you," she said. "You really scared him." I laughed, soft, incredulous. "He hit me," I said. There was a pause, just long enough. "Well," she replied, "relationships are complicated." That was the moment something inside me finally settled. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't heartbroken in the way I expected. I was clear. I told her not to contact me again and hung up before she could respond. My hands were steady when I did it. That night, I opened my laptop, not to cry, not to stalk, not to reminisce, to work. Because if I had learned anything in the wreckage of that marriage, it was this. If I was going to rebuild, it would be on my terms. And I would never again beg someone to see my worth. The days blurred into weeks, and the weeks hardened into something sturdier. During the day, I worked wherever my hands were needed. Construction sites, roofing jobs that left my shoulders screaming and my palms split raw. Electrical work that meant crawling through attics so hot they stole your breath. I came home sore, filthy, and exhausted. But there was something grounding about honest labor, something real. At night, when most people collapsed into sleep, my real work began. I opened my laptop at the small desk by the window, rain streaking the glass like restless thoughts. Finance blogs, coding tutorials, marketing case studies. Everything I had, once dabbled in while playing supporting wife to Declan's ambitions, I now took seriously. I failed constantly at first. I lost money on bad crypto investments, trusted the wrong platforms, believed in shortcuts that didn't exist. Every loss stung, but none of them humiliated me the way Declan had. Pain with purpose felt different. By the second year, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was calculating. I started flipping small properties, rundown houses nobody wanted. I bought one for $30,000, poured sweat and strategy into it, and sold it for double. Then another, no glamour, just consistency. Meanwhile, Declan's world was unraveling without me there to cushion the fall. I didn't know it yet, not fully, but the echoes reached me anyway. Mutual acquaintances stopped responding to my old email address. My name disappeared from conversations I once anchored. Through fragmented updates and whispered rumors, I learned that Declan had started an investment firm with a man named Jeremy Kane. Trinity Investment Solutions. The name alone made my stomach tighten. Promises of high returns, revolutionary tech, early access opportunities. It sounded exactly like the kind of thing Declan loved. Big words, vague details, immediate admiration. And apparently it was working. I told myself not to care. I told myself his choices were no longer my responsibility. But something in my gut kept whispering that this story wasn't over. By year 4, I had become someone else entirely. Quietly wealthy, strategically invisible. A silent partner in 2 online consulting firms that specialized in fixing broken businesses. I never showed my face, never used my real name, but my systems worked. My strategies rebuilt companies from the inside out. I had learned the value of anonymity. That was when the invitation arrived. Cream-colored paper, perfect calligraphy, no return address. Ms. Ward, your reputation in certain circles has not gone unnoticed. We cordially invite you to attend an exclusive summit for emerging global investors. Grandview Resort, Riverview, March 20th. My hometown. Declan's birthday weekend. The timing felt deliberate, unsettling. When I landed at Riverview Airport, a man was waiting for me, Maxwell Lynn. I recognized him instantly. A smooth-talking investor Declan had once idolized. We'd met exactly once, years ago, at a networking event I'd paid for. He didn't smile. Instead, he handed me a newspaper. The headline punched the air out of my lungs. Local entrepreneur arrested in $7.6 million investor scam. And there she was. Declan, in handcuffs, makeup smeared, hair disheveled, led away by federal agents. My knees almost buckled. Maxwell's voice was low, urgent. "She's trying to frame you," he said. "Told investigators you were the mastermind, that you disappeared with $2 million. They were looking for Silas Ward, my old name." The escalation was immediate and brutal, but so was my preparation. Within hours, I had lawyers in 3 states reviewing my records, bank statements, timestamps, contracts, proof that every dollar I owned was earned legally, evidence placing me in Oregon during the entirety of Trinity's operation. And while my legal team worked, I made one more call. An investigative reporter who owed me a favor. By morning, the narrative had flipped. Declan's carefully constructed lie collapsed under the weight of facts. His family distanced themselves overnight. Investors demanded answers. Friends vanished. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was controlling the direction of the storm, and something inside me shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was stepping into power. Quietly, completely, without asking permission. Power doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes wrapped in exhaustion. After the lawyers, the calls, the rapid-fire decisions that turned a looming nightmare into a controlled burn, I finally found myself alone in the penthouse suite overlooking Riverview, floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights pulsing below, the kind of place that should have made me feel victorious. Instead, I sank onto the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. They were steady, too steady. That's when it hit me. Not the fear of being arrested, not the anger at being framed, but the grief I'd postponed for 4 years. Because as much as Declan had humiliated me, as much as he had hurt me, he had once been my husband, my future, the man I thought I was building a life with. And now he was in handcuffs. I should have felt satisfaction. I didn't. I felt empty. The memories crept in, uninvited. Him laughing in the kitchen, the way he used to pull me close in public, proud and possessive. The version of us that existed before power warped everything, before contempt replaced affection. I pressed my forehead against the glass and closed my eyes. This wasn't the ending I had imagined when I left. I hadn't disappeared to win. I had disappeared to survive. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Please, I need to talk to you." I knew before I even asked. The knock came 2 nights later, 11:47 p.m. Soft, hesitant, almost respectful. When I opened the door, Declan barely looked like himself. His eyes were red, his suit rumpled. The confidence that once filled every inch of him had collapsed inward, leaving something brittle behind. He smelled like stale cologne and panic. "Silas," he said, using my old name like it might unlock something between us. Hearing it made my chest ache in a way I hadn't prepared for. I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I wanted closure, but because I needed to see him clearly. He talked fast, too fast. Jeremy had turned on him. The prosecutors were offering deals. Everyone was blaming everyone else. "They said you were the mastermind," he whispered. "I told them you were. I didn't have a choice." That sentence landed like a final nail. I said nothing. Then he did something that would have destroyed me 4 years ago. He dropped to his knees, right there on the carpet. "I know I hurt you," he said, voice breaking. "I know I was horrible, but I'm scared. Please, I need you." I watched him cry. Real tears. Not the performative ones he used when he wanted sympathy. These were messy, desperate, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no rage, no longing. Just clarity. I waited until his breathing slowed, until the room stopped vibrating with his panic. Then I spoke. "Declan," I said softly, "I'm not angry anymore." He looked up, hope flickering across his face. And that's when I finished. "Being angry at you would mean you still matter in that way, and you don't." The words weren't cruel. They were final. "You didn't lose me when you slapped me," I continued. "You lost access to me, to my time, my loyalty, my protection." I stepped back, creating space between us. "I didn't rebuild my life so I could save you from the consequences of yours." He sobbed then, really sobbed. And for the first time, I understood something essential. This was my darkest moment, not because I was weak, but because I had finally outgrown the need to be needed. I opened the door. He left without another word. When the door closed, I didn't collapse. I stood there, breathing evenly, feeling the weight of the past lift in a way I hadn't thought possible. The lowest point wasn't the slap. It wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that the man I once loved no longer had any power over my emotions. And that realization was terrifying, because it meant there was no going back, only forward. The morning after Declan left, I woke before sunrise. No alarm, no anxiety, just awareness. For years, my days had started with weight, responsibility, anticipation, the quiet dread of managing someone else's emotions before I even checked my own. That morning, the air felt different, lighter, like a room after all the furniture has been moved out and you can finally hear your own footsteps. I stood at the window, watching Riverview wake up, delivery trucks rolling in, streetlights flicking off one by one. The city I had once fled was still here, but I wasn't the same woman who had left it. The summit began at 9. 300 investors, founders, power players who measured success in influence and leverage instead of sentiment. I stepped into the Grand View Resort ballroom wearing a charcoal gray Armani suit, hair pulled back, posture steady, not dressed to impress, dressed to belong. When I was announced as the keynote speaker, a ripple of recognition moved through the room. Whispers followed me to the stage, some curious, some cautious, some impressed. I didn't rush. I took my time, placed my notes down, let the room settle. 4 years ago, I disappeared. A hush fell. Not because I wanted to hide from the world, I continued, meeting faces instead of scanning them, but because I needed to figure out who I was when nobody was watching. I didn't mention Declan by name. I didn't need to. Most of you know the headlines, I said. What they don't tell you is that success isn't built in moments of applause. It's built in silence, in obscurity, in the seasons where no one is validating your choices. I spoke about rebuilding from nothing, about making mistakes without an audience, about learning the difference between ambition and ego. I spoke about power, not the loud kind that dominates rooms, but the quiet kind that survives storms. As I talked, I felt it fully for the first time. I wasn't performing. I wasn't proving. I was standing. The applause at the end wasn't explosive. It was sustained, respectful, earned. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with an update from my legal team. The federal prosecutors had issued a statement. After reviewing the evidence, they had officially cleared me of any involvement in Trinity Investment Solutions. They were now investigating how Declan had obtained and misused my personal information. The framing attempt had collapsed. Publicly. Permanently. I sat down on a bench outside the resort, phone resting in my palm, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 4 years. This was the turning point. Not because Declan was falling, but because I was free. That night, at the charity gala, I saw him again across the room. He looked smaller, thinner, like someone who had lost the protection of denial. Our eyes met. For a fraction of a second, time froze. Then he dropped his wine glass. The sound of crystal shattering against marble cut through the music. Red wine bled across white linen like a confession no one could ignore. I didn't smile. I didn't approach. I nodded once. A quiet acknowledgement. Yes, I see you. Yes, I survived. No, you don't get to follow me here. And that was the moment I understood the truth I'd been circling for years. Closure doesn't come from conversations. It comes from evolution. You don't win by destroying the person who hurt you. You win by becoming someone they can no longer reach. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It rippled outward. Declan's name vanished from invitations first, quietly, strategically, the kind of exclusion that doesn't announce itself but leaves an echo everywhere you used to be. Business partners stopped returning his calls. Advisors distanced themselves with carefully worded emails. Friends who once drank his confidence like champagne suddenly remembered prior commitments. Reputation, I learned, doesn't shatter. It erodes. The official statements came next. Federal prosecutors confirmed that Trinity Investment Solutions was a fraudulent operation. Classic Ponzi structure, fake tech, fabricated returns. Jeremy Kane had flipped early, trading testimony for a reduced sentence. He described Declan as the architect, the persuader, the man who knew exactly how to sell belief without substance. When Declan's lawyer attempted one last maneuver, hinting at my supposed involvement, the judge shut it down immediately. Ms. Ward is not on trial, Judge Morrison said, voice clipped, final. The evidence clearly establishes she had no involvement in Trinity Investment Solutions. The room shifted after that. Declan didn't look at me. He didn't have to. The verdict came after 6 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. 6 years in federal prison. Restitution ordered. Assets seized. I attended exactly 1 day of the trial. Not to watch him fall, but to make sure he couldn't rise on my silence again. When the gavel fell, I felt no surge of victory, only release. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. I stepped past them without comment, the late afternoon sun warm against my face. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. The fallout continued long after the headlines faded. Bianca moved. His mother stopped answering calls. The circle that had once reinforced his ego dissolved under the weight of accountability. And me? I left. Not dramatically, not bitterly. I finished the summit, finalized 2 partnerships, shook hands, exchanged cards. Then I went back to Oregon, to rain, to quiet mornings, to the small apartment above the bookstore that had never asked me to be smaller than I was. A year later, I returned to Riverview for one final reason. I opened the Ward Center for Resilient Youth, a place for foster kids and teenagers who had been written off, kids who had learned too early what it felt like to be abandoned, underestimated, or blamed for surviving. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a boy near the back raised his hand. "Are you the woman who came back stronger?" he asked. I smiled. Not the polite smile I'd mastered in public. A real one. "I'm the woman who learned how to disappear," I said, without losing herself. The crowd applauded, but I barely heard it. Because for the first time in my life, my worth wasn't reflected back at me by anyone else. It was solid, internal, untouchable. Declan's downfall wasn't my triumph. My freedom was. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that rooftop. The imported wine, the custom cake, the sound of laughter after the slap. But the memory doesn't sting anymore. It feels distant, like a story someone once told me about a woman I used to know. I used to believe love was something you proved, that if you planned hard enough, gave enough, bent enough, someone would eventually meet you in the middle. I believed endurance was the same thing as strength. It isn't. Strength is knowing when to leave without begging for understanding. Strength is walking away before resentment turns you into someone you don't recognize. Strength is choosing silence over spectacle. When I disappeared, people thought I'd lost everything. What I actually lost was permission. Permission for others to define me, diminish me, or access me without earning it. I didn't rebuild my life to humiliate the man who hurt me. I rebuilt it because staying broken would have meant letting him win forever. Healing didn't come from revenge. It came from growth so complete that the past couldn't follow. Today, my life is quieter. Smaller in ways that matter. Bigger in ways that last. I choose work that aligns with my values. I surround myself with people who don't flinch at my strength. I rest without guilt. And if there's one thing I've learned, one truth I wish someone had told me earlier, it's this. Being loved should never require you to disappear inside your own life. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't confrontation. It's absence. Because when you leave with your dignity intact, you take something with you that they can never replace. You take yourself. And that is always enough.